Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second class on the four immeasurables. So tonight the main topic will be immeasurable love, but let's go ahead and do the prayers for tonight first. And then we're going to do a short meditation on immeasurable equanimity that we covered last week. I mentioned that last week that I think it's kind of nice to do a little bit of group practice around each of these. We won't make it too long, but so in order to accommodate that, we're just going to recite the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once. I don't know if you wanted to lead these, Jana, or do you want me just to go ahead? Are you fine with me going forward? I can't see you right now. So,
Oh, I can do the prayers.
okay, why don't you lead them and I will mute myself so that
Okay.
I'm not over your voice. Okay.
If it's echoing too much, just cut in and tell me. Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, once in English, to the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Short mandala offering, once in Tibetan. Saji ki jukshing me tog tram ri rab ling ji ni de gyan padi sangye jing du mikte uwai Drokunam Dagjing La Chopar Shog Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Refuge in Bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodam soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gi pe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodam soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gi pe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shog.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation. So as I said, we'll meditate a little on immeasurable equanimity, and then we'll kind of feed this into setting our motivation of bodhicitta for tonight. So just find a good meditation posture and bring the awareness to the breath to begin with. We'll do a few minutes of focused meditation on the breath, and you can use whatever technique you prefer to use with the breath. Whenever the mind wanders, just gently guide the mind back to the breath. So again, a few minutes in silence, and then I will come in and lead you in this guided meditation. So now to do this meditation on equanimity, we can recall from last week that we have these three groups of individuals that we have distorted attitudes towards. We have biases. We want to kind of remove those biases through this meditation. And the more traditional way of visualizing these groups is to have our friends, the close ones, in the space to either side and immediately behind us. Then to have in the space in front of us, we visualize those who are difficult for us. And we might call these enemies. These are the challenging people in our lives. And then surrounding those two groups that we have a somewhat defined relationship with are the countless strangers. You can think about all these beings in human form, but we can't really, you know, imagine how many beings are in this category. All of these strangers, beings that we don't have either enmity with or friendship with. These are the people behind the scenes. Do your best to visualize these three groups and then to draw forth from each of these groups one individual that you're comfortable working with and bring them visually and through your imagination, visualize them in the space immediately in front of you. Someone who represents the group of friends, close people, someone who represents the difficult people, and then a third being that represents the group of strangers, those who we don't know so well. And here we just choose perhaps a face that we've seen around town, the store, wherever, somebody who we don't have any real idea of who they are. Then to begin with, we check our attitudes in regard to these three individuals that are somewhat symbolic of the attitudes we have towards their entire group. Towards the friend, we often have attachment. And we do have some love and concern for this being, but we are often quite attached. We want them to continue to do what they do for us. And in that way, we're happy to do what we can for them. But it seems to be this kind of quid pro quo relationship. We take care of them because they take care of us. See how that attachment does play a role in a relationship with that being that you've chosen from the group of friends. And then, of course, with regard to the individual who's from the group of enemies, you can see how the attitude that we have towards them when we observe them is one of animosity, maybe even anger, hatred, depending upon who we've chosen. It can be varying levels of these afflictive emotions that are all around the continuum of anger. So again, just observe that that's the reaction that comes up. That's the attitude that we have when we generally think about those beings in that category, like this one that we've chosen to work with. And then when we turn our attention to the third being, the being who represents the group of strangers, you can see our attitude there is frequently indifference. And we don't really have much concern or regard for that being. We don't really know much about their lives. We don't have anything that connects us with them. And so we have this kind of blah feeling, this indifference. And this is, again, a problematic attitude because it doesn't allow us to open our hearts to that being or to the entire group of strangers that this being represents. So we're just going to work with one of the reasons why we can undermine this attitude that we have towards each of these three groups: the attachment to friends, the animosity towards enemies, the indifference towards strangers. And we're going to use the third one that I went through to kind of see the sameness of each of these beings. When we observe these three together, we see that there is nothing to really differentiate them in terms of their fundamental desire to be happy and to not suffer. Just like yourself, your friend, the being you've chosen to work with as that's an enemy, the stranger, they're all identical in that very basic way, wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, and yet continuing to suffer and continuing to not find true peace, true happiness. This is the predicament that all of these beings are in and that we ourselves are in. So try to observe these three from that perspective first, but then also to see that these beings have the potential. They have Buddha nature. They have the kind of birthright to be able to attain true happiness and to be free from all suffering. So in that way, we are also like those beings and they are like each other. There is a sameness there in terms of every one of them having Buddha nature and having the potential to remove everything that is negative in their minds and to develop all the positive qualities. And try to observe beings, all three of these. Just try to generate the sense of an equal regard by seeing their sameness, wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, and having the potential to attain true peace and happiness, complete freedom from suffering. And as you think in this way, check out to see whether this has reduced in some way the biases that you feel towards these three beings, and hence for the three groups that they represent. Can we feel a sense of an even-mindedness towards all three, to have an equal regard for all three, to want to benefit each of these beings, regardless of what role they're playing in our lives at this time, of friend, enemy, or stranger, because they're all fundamentally the same. And then to cultivate the immeasurable equanimity, we want other beings to have this same state. To see that if beings were to abide in equanimity, they would have unbelievable peace. They would not be at war with their enemies or attached to their friends, having a feeling of indifference to the countless other beings who are strangers. They would be equally concerned for each and every single sentient being. So we cultivate that thought, wishing for all beings to have equanimity. And moreover, for them to have the happiness that they seek, and also to be free from the suffering that they are experiencing, all the various dissatisfactions of samsara, and for them to attain their ultimate welfare, the state of Buddhahood. And then the recognition that to do this for them, to take that task upon ourselves, and to accomplish it perfectly, we need to become enlightened. We need to become a Buddha. So we generate the motivation of bodhicitta that is informed by that mind of equanimity, that wants all beings to attain that state, as well as to attain the complete happiness and freedom from suffering that they have the potential to attain. So we have to become a Buddha in order to accomplish this. So we generate the mind of bodhicitta, the wish to become fully enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. And then you can open your eyes fully, and we'll actually recite the four measurable thoughts, the prayer that we're using for this course. beginning with what we just meditated on and covered last week, measurable equanimity. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. And you can visualize, again, forearm Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, sending down rays of light that bless your mental continuum and allow you to achieve the state where you can help all beings to abide in equanimity. And we'll do a similar visualization at the end of each of these remaining three immeasurables, next immeasurable love. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will cause them to have happiness and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. And then immeasurable compassion. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free of suffering and its causes. I myself will cause them to be free of suffering and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. Again, receive the blessings of the Buddha of compassion, thinking that this is the same essence as your own gurus, appearing in this form to help you to generate these four measurable thoughts and to eventually accomplish the welfare of all beings completely. And then finally, immeasurable joy. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never separated from the happiness of higher rebirth and liberation. May they never be separated from these. I myself will cause them to never be separated from these. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do this. And then we can go back to our subject at hand. So I wanted to check in to see if there were any questions or comments on equanimity. Hopefully you had a chance to work with that little sheet that's part of your materials that gives you some guidelines for how to cultivate this initially for yourself. Again, this is what's unique to some degree about equanimity. With a measurable equanimity, of course, we have to cultivate that mind ourselves. That's the basis for generating bodhicitta, as we're going to see in particular when we get to the final class and we relate the four immeasurables in their entirety to the techniques for generating bodhicitta. But nonetheless, we want all beings to have this state because we can see the advantages of being free of these biases, to no longer have those, and to be able to relate to all sentient beings from that even ground. So any questions or comments on this first immeasurable? No? So again, hopefully you've been able to access the materials. I saw they did go out with the email this week from Sarah. So thank you, Sarah, for doing that, and John for helping to get everything to her. So again, this was the first page of the handout. Tonight we are moving on to immeasurable love. And I do want to start with the little description, a bit of context that Kathleen MacDonald gives in her book, Awakening the Kind Heart, which I mentioned last week. It's a really nice book with teachings on the four immeasurables, as well as the wonderful 8 verses of thought transformation by Langri Tongpa. But anyway, she says the desire for happiness unites all beings, human and non-human. Feeling love for others means acknowledging this desire, respecting it, and doing what we can to fulfill it. This kind of love is sometimes called loving kindness, to distinguish it from love that is mixed with lust or selfish attachment. Loving kindness is pure, unselfish, and unconditional. Immeasurable love means wishing all beings to have happiness and its causes. It's again taking it outside of the realm of just our own unconditional love for a being or two that are in our more immediate circle, and it's extending it to all beings. That's what we're trying to do again with these immeasurables, is to make sure that we're kind of breaking through the boundaries that we currently have and trying to make our thoughts boundless. So again, that's why equanimity once more is taught first, is because if we don't have that even ground of seeing all beings as equally worthy of our regard, to have an equal concern for them, then the other ones are blocked. Mentioned this last week. Again, this is why we, in the Mahayana, when we're particularly looking at cultivating these to feed into bodhicitta, we see that we need equanimity as the foundation in order to cultivate the thoughts of loving kindness, compassion, and joy that are going to follow. So again, the point that Kathleen MacDonald makes is, made in almost all the teachings on this second immeasurable love, that this is sometimes referred to as loving kindness. And that's because, again, when we use the word love in the English language, it can have a lot of different connotations, right? We can be talking about romantic love. And romantic love, of course, is very much involved in attachment, this kind of selfish mind that is looking at the other person to meet our needs. And of course, we also have some genuine love there together with that, where we are concerned about their needs and trying to, help them to find happiness, to, have that kind of joy in the moment and what have you. But at the same time, it often gets tangled up with attachment. This is why it's problematic often in our very close relationships, why we needed to do a bit of that balancing that out with equanimity to try to reduce some of the attachment we have so we can have a more genuine love for those beings who are in that category. Because right now, our love is very much tainted by attachment. So this is one reason why we do sometimes use the word loving kindness, but nonetheless, uh, measurable love works just fine. We don't need to, as long as we have that understanding that we're talking about a genuine love that's unconditional, that is a sincere concern for the welfare of other beings. Again, we do have that very frequently, of course, with those beings who are in our circle of friends, and we often even have it for strangers. Of course, it's very rare that we would have thoughts of loving kindness for our enemies, but nonetheless, we still are very deficient in our love, in our loving kindness. This is why we need to engage in these practices to expand it. So, in the traditional teachings, of course, they talk about the benefits of loving kindness. I'm not going to go into these so much in the Lamrim, the stages of the path text in Tibetan Buddhism. There are 8 benefits of love. But essentially, we see that a lot of them revolve around this thought that if we are living our lives with the thought of loving kindness towards others, really wanting them to be happy and being dedicated to achieving their happiness as best as we can, well, then this produces a karma that is all about, other beings uh, not being of kind of harm to you, being there to help you. We kind of create a synergy with others that is really quite useful. We are always in their good graces in a sense, because that's the mindset that we bring to our relationships with those beings. I remember Richard Gere. Many of you saw this video. It's probably been a while since many of us have seen it, but in the video that was done, there were 13 videos that were done for discovering Buddhism. Many of you might remember these. They're all out on YouTube. And for Module 10 on bodhicitta, at the end of each video, they would have a student talking about that module. And for the end of Module 10 on bodhicitta, they had Richard Gere. And Richard Gere was talking all about how he decided he was going to engage in this practice of essentially doing loving kindness meditation with every being that he met. So, like, his first thought whenever he would see somebody wouldn't be, "Oh, what is this person up to? Or can I trust them? Or should I be suspicious? Should I, reach out to them and be concerned about them?" His first thought would be, "May you be happy," which of course is one of the core thoughts in our 4 measurables. It's the one we start with, or I'm sorry, the second one. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had happiness, and the causes of happiness, may they have that. But if that's your first thought when you meet every being, you're kind of practicing a sort of generosity of love, that you're trying to create that type of energy with every being that you meet. Well, it's a very powerful karma. So once more, it tends to protect you. It provides you with kind of the ideal conditions. And so it's a very powerful practice to engage in. So as I said, I won't go through all the details of those 8 benefits. Kathleen McDonald in her book talks about many other benefits. Just, physically, we can see that we are more at peace than ourselves, and so we don't have all the stress in our lives, and we can get to bed and sleep easier. We can find a lot of things that are, again, complementary. We're more serene in how we go about our living our lives. She even points out that we'll die with a better state of mind if we practice loving kindness throughout our lives. I mean, imagine on your deathbed being, that concerned about the welfare of others that your heart is filled with loving kindness for all beings. And it's a very positive state of mind, obviously, that we can advance to great degrees. Remember, with these immeasurables, we're not limiting them, we're trying to create them to a vast extent. So again, the obstacles to love, are the things that normally, are problematic for us. And in fact, this is one of the things that we need to see. Remember how we talked about with equanimity, we have a near enemy and a far enemy. With the mind of love, we have a near enemy and a far enemy as well. The near enemy of love is this mind of attachment, selfish attachment, that is problematic in that it doesn't allow us to generate that genuine concern for the welfare of another because it's tainted by attachment. So we have to be careful, again, when we are generating these thoughts of loving kindness, particularly with those in our group of friends, where we already do have patterns of attachment, to make sure that that doesn't creep into it, that we are genuinely seeing them as a being who wants to be happy, and we are genuinely concerned about their happiness and their well-being. So that's one of the things we have to be careful of, is to make sure that we avoid that near enemy. Of course, the far enemy of love, of loving kindness, is hatred. Where we generate a mind that is totally opposed to the well-being of another. And that can manifest in a variety of ways, such as this wonderful word in German, Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is where we take delight in somebody else's misery, where we aren't kind of taking delight in their happiness and well-being, but rather we are kind of at that place where we only get happy when they are suffering, when they are dealing with things that are miserable for them. So we have to be very careful again about falling into the mind of hatred. It's extremely problematic in our lives and in our world. Obviously, hatred is behind so many conflicts and difficulties that are going on in our world. So we have to be very mindful to use loving kindness as an antidote to that as much as we can. So again, I just wanted to touch on those because I'm trying to do that with all 4 of these so that we understand again when we're maybe kind of close to love, but it still could be a little off. And that's that mind again of selfish attachment. But also, what is love really there to combat? It's to combat the feelings of hatred, that strong emotion that is really kind of upset and angry at other beings and wanting them to suffer. Um, I also want to talk about, before we get into the actual practice, what do we mean by happiness here? It's kind of interesting. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, which he was known to do, rewrote many of these prayers over time. The one that I'm sharing with you is an older version where it talks about how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had happiness and the causes of happiness. He later changed this to how wonderful it would be if all beings experienced the bliss of Buddhahood. Of course, that's, a pretty high bar to kind of throw out there. Um, there's nothing wrong with that, of course. And Rinpoche's advice, is really what we are aiming for. When we say how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had this happiness, we really want them to have the apex of happiness, the completion of their well-being in regard to their happiness, their bliss, which is Buddhahood. But nonetheless, there's nothing wrong with reciting the prayer the way I have given you the prayer, with happiness and its causes. We just have to be really clear about what we mean by that. So I think I want to spend again a little bit of time talking about what we're really wishing for sentient beings to have. Because obviously we don't want them to have, for example, Schadenfreude, right? You don't want them to have the happiness that comes from defeating their enemy or watching their enemy suffer. We don't even want them to have the happiness that comes from, overindulgence in sense objects and all the kinds of things that sentient beings tend to put a lot of their onus for happiness on. They think that, oh, if I have all these wonderful things, if I have 5 homes all around the world and all this money in the bank, well, then I'll be happy. Well, we know from Buddhism and all of our studies that those external things play some role in our immediate happiness, but they don't play any sort of final role, and they can become problematic once more because of the mind of attachment and greed and all the other things that arise when we have all those physical things. So we're not talking about those sorts of pleasures. In psychology, they use the term hedonic pleasure, hedonic happiness, the hedonistic kind of things that we normally associate with that, where you just want to have all of those sensory pleasures in your life. When we're wishing for sentient beings to have happiness, we want them to have things that bring them a measure of comfort and stability in their life. And we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That sentient beings, human beings in particular, is what that's related to. But essentially, beings have to have some foundation in things that are taken care of for them, to have a roof over their head and to have food on the table and, enough financial means so that they are somewhat comfortable. But when we get too much of that, once more, it can become problematic for beings. So we're not kind of excluding some level of hedonistic pleasure, hedonistic happiness, but moreover, we want to make sure that sentient beings are finding a deeper happiness, a deeper state of well being. The term they use in Western psychology for this is eudaimonia. Eudaimonia or eudaimonic happiness is a happiness that arises from a sense of purpose and meaning in life. It's something that is much deeper that we carry with us. And of course, in Buddhist terms, we would correlate this with what we call the happiness of Dharma, the happiness that we find when we begin to turn away from patterns that don't lead us to true happiness and turn inside to techniques that lead us to greater states of well being. This is, again, what we are trying to do on the Buddhist path, is to find our sources of happiness within us, as opposed to looking outside of us. There's a wonderful book by Venerable Mathieu Ricard called Happiness. And in there, this is the description that he gives to the happiness that he feels we should be striving to attain. But moreover, we can use this as what we are trying to want beings to have. When we're observing sentient beings with immeasurable love, this is the happiness that we want them to find. He describes it as this: a deep sense of flourishing that arises from an exceptionally healthy mind. This is not a mere pleasurable feeling, a fleeting emotion, or a mood, but an optimal state of being. Of course, this is, pretty transcendent view of happiness. Happiness is very hard to define. If you talk to different people, they'll all have a different definition of what they mean by happiness. But this is a deeper state of well-being that we can all accomplish. But it does entail, shutting out to some degree those sources of pleasurable feelings that are outside of us and going within and finding what can bring us happiness and well-being at a deeper level. And of course, that's what these four measurables are all about, really. I mean, they're all to get us to a place where we find a deeper resonance within ourselves with values and things that we can grow and develop from. This is, again, what he described as a sense of flourishing, something that we can, want to continue to develop because we see we become happier and more content by virtue of our embracing these states of mind and practicing in this way. Speaking of Venerable Matthew, he's been tested by some of these neurosurgeons. You probably have seen pictures of him with his bald head, with all the little electrode things all on his head. And what they've done is they've had him meditate on compassion, and they monitor what's going on in his brain at that time, which areas are lighting up and what have you. And from their observation, they've dubbed him the happiest man on earth because he has all these sections of his brain that are lighting up in unbelievable ways when he's meditating on compassion. And you might look at it and go, I mean, compassion, we're going to talk about compassion next week. It's a tough one because it means to kind of feel the suffering of others, to be with the suffering of others. There is an opening of our hearts in a somewhat vulnerable way and a little bit painful, perhaps, for us even to look at the suffering of other beings. But this is something that induces in Venerable Matthew and in so many people who practice generating compassion a state of well being, because it kind of puts us into a place where we are in touch with, once more, our deepest desires, our deepest resonances with other beings and with what our true purpose is in being here. So again, it's the Proof is there, even in the scientific arena, that these sorts of meditations induce a deeper sense of well being. And this is ideally what we are wishing for others to have. Maybe again, not that they have to practice meditation to get these, but to experience some level of well being that comes from connection to others, from opening their hearts to others, from growing and developing in a more positive direction, rather than continuing to do all the things that are really not a source of happiness or well being in the long term at all. Now, again, doesn't mean we can't wish for them to have some of the basic things, those more hedonistic pleasures that do lead to at least some stability in one's life. If we didn't all, if we weren't all well fed right now with roofs over our heads and what have you, then we would be experiencing things very, very differently. So there is that kind of that can be a part of what we're wishing for others when we are generating these thoughts. But nonetheless, we want to go beyond that. We really want to make sure that we think about other beings going on that path of continual flourishing, developing all the way to Buddhahood. That's why Rinpoche again chose in later translations to say, may they have happiness or may they have the bliss of Buddhahood rather than may they have happiness and its causes, because in his estimation, it was kind of too wide to just say happiness and its causes, because there are a lot of things, as I described earlier, that are states of happiness for some people that, again, are somewhat problematic. It can lead to more difficulties in their lives rather than to a deeper state of well being. So on the sheet that I put together for you, we have two practices. Again, we are going to work first with cultivating love for oneself. I didn't mean to do that. How did that happen? Got to get back. Okay, there we go. Cultivating love for oneself. And then we're going to go on to cultivate love for other beings. And then, of course, we channel that into immeasurable love. So, in regard to ourselves, I mean, I might mention that it is important that we generate these thoughts of loving kindness. And then next week, when we look at compassion for ourselves, because we are equally worthy as objects of compassion and love. And oftentimes in our culture, we don't create those mindsets towards ourselves enough. Many people have a lot of self-hatred and self-loathing even towards themselves. So again, we have to kind of begin there and cultivate this thought towards ourselves. So the very first point there, in terms of cultivating love for yourself, is to consider how you are the same as all beings in wanting to be happy and to have the causes of happiness. Again, this is a thought that we entertain to some degree with equanimity, to see that all beings are exactly the same in wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer. Here we're focusing on that side of it, that they want to be happy, and we're just simply applying that to ourselves. Well, there's no difference in ourselves. We also want to be happy and to have the causes of happiness, and we deserve to be happy, just like any other being. Then, in the next bullet point, generate an attitude of loving kindness for yourself, remembering the following. First, to accept yourself as you are, with all your present faults and shortcomings. To recognize that we're all works in progress. Every one of us is on this path of trying to develop our qualities and so on. So we just have to accept ourselves where we're at, and in that way, generate genuine thoughts of well being towards ourselves. Secondly, be a friend to yourself, not being angry or frustrated that you aren't the person you'd ideally like to be. This is so much a part of our culture. These thoughts of kind of putting ourselves down, focusing on our, negative tendencies and what have you, that we think we should be better than this. Even in our Buddhist path, we get frustrated in this way, thinking, "Oh, I've been practicing so long, and I'm still having thoughts of hatred and animosity towards beings and what have you." Well, be a friend to yourself. If you had a friend who came up to you and spoke to you about their own concerns about how they're not there yet, they've got so many faults, they're not really living up to their ideals, you wouldn't kind of rub their nose in it. You would want to comfort them in some way, to help them to see that they're, again, works in progress, and that it just takes time, energy, effort, and over time they will be able to develop all these amazing qualities. So be a genuine friend to yourself. This is going to come up when we look at self-compassion as well next week. Third, acknowledge your potential to change and grow, to experience greater happiness, peace, and positive qualities. This is what we talked about last week is another way that all beings are the same. And we even threw it into the meditation tonight on equanimity, that all beings have the potential to achieve unbelievable states of well-being. They all have Buddha nature. Hey, I know it's very hard. Some of us have been practicing for a while, and when we think about it, we might go, "Oh, I really haven't changed that much." Well, you have. Trust me, you have. In the 5, 10, 20, 30, whatever years you've been practicing Buddhism, you have changed. Absolutely. I have no doubt that you've changed. And oftentimes we're blind to that reality and we don't kind of acknowledge what we have done and also acknowledge that we can continue on that path of improvement and doing what we can do to move closer and closer to these goals of, Buddhahood and so on. So again, really recall that we are improving all the time. It might look, a few steps forward, then a few steps back sometimes, and what have you. But nonetheless, we're going to kind of keep moving in that direction and making sure that we do have kind of the most positive outcome by feeding that and not kind of dampening things. Again, the Pema Chodron uses the example of like throwing concrete on your garden and expecting the flowers to grow. We have to treat ourselves really nicely. And we have to acknowledge we have the potential to become unbelievably kind and compassionate and so on. And then number 4, give yourself the space to fulfill that potential, truly wishing yourself to be happy. So it starts with kind of the initial impulse of observing ourselves and kind of holding ourselves in the space of loving kindness without even any words. We're going to get to the words in a moment, the thoughts that we articulate towards ourselves. But we're just kind of opening our hearts to fulfill our potential, to be seen as, again, a being that has Buddha nature and can achieve unbelievable states of well being and happiness. Then the next bullet point there, then hold that wish in the space of thoughts, such as, may I be happy, may I be safe, free from harm and danger. May I have all that I need to be truly happy, peaceful, and satisfied. May all my thoughts and actions be positive and all my experiences good. Again, these are just suggestions. You can come up with your own language. Again, many people do this as part of what in the Theravadan tradition they call this metta meditation, METTA. That is the word for loving kindness in the Pali language. Remember, in Sanskrit I presented last week, it's Maitri. But this is again this meditation that you do where you first start with yourself and you generate those thoughts of loving kindness towards yourself, really wanting yourself to attain the happiness that once more is your birthright. Every one of us deserves to be happy. I don't have the quote in front of me. There's this wonderful quote that it's from one of the sutras in the Pali Canon um, that I saw for the first time at the Garden of a Thousand Buddhas near Missoula, Montana, when I was up there visiting our center. It's a wonderful place if you're ever up that way to visit this beautiful, beautiful land where they've got all these amazing Buddha statues and what have you. But there's one little quote on a plaque from the Buddha. Again, I think it comes from one of the Pali suttas, but essentially it's saying that if you look all over the world, you cannot find anyone who's more deserving of loving kindness than yourself. And it's not to say that we then inflate our sense of like, oh, well, I'm the most important in the world. It's saying you can't find anyone who's more deserving. We are all equally deserving of that loving kindness, but we tend to think everyone else is more deserving than ourselves. We tend to, again, put ourselves down. So we have to remember that. We have to just start generating these types of thoughts that are done in the metta meditation of may I be happy, may I be at peace, may I have true well-being. May I have, again, I like that phrase I threw in there, may I have everything I need to be, satisfied and so on. So we don't like wish for ourselves to have, 18, Mercedes Benz and 20 houses around the world and all these various things that are just going to become distractions and kind of meaningless for us on our spiritual path. We want to have what will support us. And again, this is where we start with ourselves wanting to have these things so that we can then eventually generate the same wishes for others. Then the last step that I put in there again, and you can add other things from other teachers. This is just the way I threw this together, Imagine that the warm energy of loving kindness in your heart now radiates out, gradually filling your entire body and mind, and you become suffused with happiness and its causes. Kind of feel like you're receiving that, you know. Again, we have to be willing to extend this to ourselves and see ourselves in the light of being a being who is deserving of happiness and the causes of happiness, all the way again to Buddhahood. And you can even, of course, imagine yourself going, to that state of Buddhahood as you're wishing for yourself to have happiness. That starts again, the kind of gets the loving kindness flowing and going in our hearts when we meditate on ourselves. In the traditional metta meditation, I think it extends out then to friends, extends out then to strangers, to enemies, and then to all sentient beings. That's kind of what we're going to do in the remainder of this. But start wherever you're most comfortable. I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but with equanimity, in some of the texts, they actually say to start with strangers rather than friends. And in my instructions, I think I have friends first and then strangers. But there is something to be said for enemies. I'm sorry, for strangers as being a basis for equanimity because we do tend to have some equal regard. But remember, there's that near enemy of indifference that we don't want to cultivate towards beings. So I always encourage people to start with friends and to try to lessen our sense of attachment. And certainly when we're working with friends with loving kindness, we do have to be careful with attachment as well, as I mentioned earlier, because oftentimes we find it really easy to generate loving kindness towards our friends, but that's because it's mixed with our mind of attachment to them. And so we have to be, again, a little bit careful there. But nonetheless, the kind of order that we usually use in each of these four is to start with our friends, then move on to the neutral people, the strangers, and then finally work with enemies, difficult people, those with whom you have a difficult relationship. And once more, bring back that mind of equanimity if you are finding that these distorted attitudes are creeping into it. If you're feeling some indifference towards the strangers when you start working with them, or feeling some hatred or animosity towards enemies. But nonetheless, that is the foundation for all of these that are coming yet again tonight, next week with immeasurable compassion and then immeasurable joy, is that equanimity is the basis. So we can, again, always go back to that if we're finding these problematic states of mind arising. Then the third bullet point, extend loving kindness to each of these three groups by recalling the way that they have been kind to us. And this is a little addendum that I added here that we're going to go through in a moment now. And it'll give you more meat, if you will, to reflect on in regard to feeling a sense of closeness and kinship with these beings. And then, of course, as it says they're wishing them happiness in a similar way as when working with oneself. In other words, you would use these same sorts of phrases, such as, may you be happy, may you be safe, free from danger and harm, and so on, all the various things that we went through. So let's go through that addendum. This is the first of the two that I have added at the back of this. This is again called Points for Meditation on the Kindness of All Beings. I want to say first that, when we talk about the kindness of all beings, we're going to kind of bend our definition of kindness a bit. In our culture, when we think of kindness, we think of simply those acts that are quite intentionally and directly beneficial, right? This is our tendency in our culture. Oh, are they kind to me? Well, are they doing something good for me? Are they taking care of me? You know, that's how we see kindness in regard to others generally. That's only one level of kindness. So keep that in mind as we explore this. We're going to be enlarging what we mean by kindness that we have received. Now, when it comes to showing kindness to others as we live our lives, and these four measurables feed into how we act in the world, of course, we want to be as directly and intentionally kind to others as we can, to do what we can when we see people who need a little extra money or need, a meal or whatever the case might be, or need someone to just talk to them, or that we are happy to give our time to engage in various acts of generosity and kindness. So we can certainly see that when it comes to expressing our love to others, we want it to be as direct and as intentional as possible. But when it comes to receiving kindness, there we want to enlarge our definition and really see the ways that sentient beings can be kind to us that are not so evident. So, in this meditation, as it says here, we can gain an appreciation for the kindness of every living being by thinking about the direct and indirect, as well as the intentional and unintentional kindness that we experience from the three categories of beings: friends, difficult people, and strangers. So again, we tend to think that the only people who are kind to us are generally those in our category of friends. And that's where we can start, certainly, as it says there. You can meditate on the kindness of those who are your friends and loved ones. Again, that's that group of people. If I use the analogy I used last week of the theater, and we're on stage, those are the people in the first few rows that we can see them. The stage lights are shining on them, and we can see their smiling faces, and they tend to us and take care of us in that way, as it says there in point A. They are those who are directly and intentionally kind to us, and thus should be easy to recognize and appreciate, their kindness that they're showing us, right? Because they're the ones that are, yeah, throwing flowers at us and being very generous and, what have you, clapping for us, applauding us when we do well and what have you. Then the second point, think about those who in the past and currently do contribute to your welfare quite directly. Your parents, siblings, grandparents, a partner or spouse, children, friends, others close to you, pets. I should have included pets on there. Our pets are very much in that category of those who are generally quite intentionally and directly kind to us by attending to us when maybe we don't feel so well, and our pets will snuggle up to us or what have you. But all there's like many different categories of beings that fall into this first group of those that are friends or loved ones. Then, thirdly, feel a deep appreciation for the kindness that you receive from these dear ones in your life. Again, this shouldn't be difficult. This is a very basic thing that we can acknowledge and appreciate really quite quickly with regard to those beings who are in that category. The second group are those who are strangers. Again, this would be who we would go to next after working with friends for a while and really enlarging our loving kindness towards them, having recalled their kindness. In this category of strangers, in point A there, it says this is mostly those who are indirectly and usually unintentionally kind to us. This is something that a group that I think hopefully most of us became very aware of their role, the role that they play in regard to our well being during the pandemic, right? Because many of us, and maybe some of you, were frontline people that needed to be there doing all the challenging things that needed to be done. But many of us were benefiting from others who were doing all of this work, right? We would go down to the store with our masks on and everything to make sure we weren't getting the virus, and we'd be able to buy the foods that we need, the toilet paper most of the time, that we needed, all those things that were beneficial for our well-being. They didn't just miraculously appear on the shelves. There were beings who were behind the scenes doing all this, right? And we don't really see those beings, and they're not in that way directly kind to us. They're also not intentionally kind to us. And the beings, as they were, putting together all the packages of food and everything that I ate, they didn't say, "Oh, I can't wait for dawn to eat this and enjoy this." I mean, they have no knowledge of me. They were doing their work, and we can say they may not even have had an attitude of kindness. Maybe they're just there because they get paid to do that work, and maybe they were getting paid extra to work during the pandemic. I don't know. But the idea is that I have benefited from that. Every one of us benefited from these countless strangers who even put their lives at risk in regard to the pandemic. They were out there doing what they do, and oftentimes in situations where they, did become ill with the virus and what have you. So nonetheless, this is a kindness that we have all the time. It wasn't just there during the pandemic. It just became perhaps a bit more noticeable. But we have this going on all around us. You know, the roads that we drive on are, there because beings actually went out and put the asphalt down and all the stuff that's involved in all of that, right? It takes quite a bit of work in order to produce a road. And once more, they don't do it with any intention for me to drive on it, but nonetheless, I benefit from having roads so I can go where I need to go, right? The cars that we drive, all of these various things, they require beings to be involved. There's no such thing as a self-sufficient person. We cannot be totally self-sufficient and take care of ourselves 100%. We need other elements of the world around us. So this is what the role that strangers often are playing. We do know some people who are also doing these things for us. I'm not saying that these are always strangers, but most of these beings are strangers, as it says in point B there under number 2. This includes those, whether human beings or animals, who help us to have all the possessions we use and enjoy, such as the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, the cars we drive, the houses we live in, and so forth, right? We could not have these things if it was not for these amazing beings who were behind the scenes doing all of this. Once more, in the analogy of the theater, they're in the dark of the theater, right? They're the ones that we can't see and we don't really have an awareness of them, but they're a part of our show. Absolutely. They make it possible for us to live our lives. Oh, I'm sorry. How did I go down one? Must have hit my thing accidentally. Sorry about that. Then go on to point C. Think about those who have in the past and currently do contribute to your welfare in this way. So we kind of bring to mind beings in that category of strangers. Again, we don't know them directly, but we can think about, oh, I know I enjoy this particular food. Or what about all the people that work at that factory and who harvest the grains and the various substances that are put into that food and whatever? I mean, you can kind of let your imagination run wild. And then D, develop a sense of genuine appreciation for the kindness that you experience from all these kind strangers who have helped you or are helping you now to have these things in your life. When we have a deeper appreciation for the role that others play in showing us kindness, then our heart begins to open with more loving kindness towards them. And this second way of kind of seeing the role that many strangers play in our well being behind the scenes is very transformative because it allows us to relate to those beings in our daily life in a much different way, right? The countless people that are just out there. One thing I find that I tend to do, I don't know, maybe I do other things, I'm sure too, but when I'm traveling, whenever I'm in any of the airport restrooms and there's one of those people that comes to clean the restrooms, I always make sure to thank them for what they do. I mean, it's a very small thing, right? But I'm sure to them it makes some kind of difference that people notice them and acknowledge what they're doing. I mean, thanks to this person, I can come into a nice clean restroom and when I'm traveling, whatever. I mean, again, these are just small things. And I try to do that with other people who we see do contribute to our welfare in some way that's really quite indirect. But, to show that sense of appreciation and to come from that space of some measure of loving kindness for them, some concern about their well being, can be really a wonderful way, once more, to uh, give to others, give the gift of loving kindness to those that we meet. Then, this third point, when we get to the group of enemies or difficult people in our lives. In this category of difficult people are those who actually are what we often see as the opposite of kind, right? They are unkind, since they are directly and intentionally harmful to us or those that we care about through their behavior, views, and so on. So here is where we are bending the definition of kindness to the greatest degree, right? Because in our normal conventional way of looking at the world. These are beings who are unkind, who are harmful, who are doing the things that upset us and those that we love, right? So, how can you see what they are doing as a kindness? So again, His Holiness emphasizes this frequently. We have to be able to see that we need those difficult people in our lives. This is one point that's emphasized very much in what are called the Lojong, the mind transformation teachings in Tibetan Buddhism. That if it wasn't for these difficult people, we wouldn't have the ability and opportunity to expand our practice of compassion, loving kindness, compassion, to kind of take us to those places of being most challenged in generating those mind states, right? We need those beings in our lives. Every being who manifests as a difficult person is a very precious treasure. There's that, it's mentioned the 8 verses that are in Kathleen MacDonald's book, her commentary on them. It's the 4th verse. Whenever I see beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by negative actions and suffering, I shall hold such rare ones dear as if I had found a precious treasure. That's how we should ideally see these beings, is they are giving us this amazing opportunity to deepen our practice. It's not how we tend to look at them, right? They're thinking they're giving us the amazing opportunity to get kind of bent out of shape and get our minds all angry and upset. Well, you can do that. That's what we've been doing, but that doesn't lead to any real happiness for ourselves or for them. Instead, we want to see those beings who are challenging to us as being an excellent opportunity for us to deepen our practice of all these different things. Again, patience, kindness, tolerance, what have you. That's point B here, and yet we can still see what appears to be unkind as a kindness, since without such challenging people in our lives, we cannot develop and strengthen our compassion, our love, our patience. And again, this is the point that His Holiness makes often, is that we need these enemies, we need these difficult people. In that quote that I gave you from the 8 verses, that fourth verse, it talks about them being rare. And for most of us, they actually are pretty rare. I mean, I would hope that none of you have that's your whole theater, is all beings filled with, filled with all beings who are unkind to you. That's probably not the case for most of us, though, right? We tend to have just a few individuals in our life who are unkind to us in a more direct way, and we might have some individuals in our political landscape or whatever that we see as unfavorable, challenging, difficult for us. But nonetheless, the vast majority of beings are actually pretty benign and probably pretty amenable and kind, when it comes down to it. That's why, once more, we really need these beings. When you do have people who fall into that category and you're going to work with them and trying to generate loving kindness towards them, one of the ways to assure that that's going to flow freely is to see that they are actually amazing beings to help us to practice all these things much more deeply. Our patience doesn't get challenged really until it comes to those sorts of beings. I'm not denying that those who are loving and kind to us sometimes can be challenging too. Sometimes the people we're closest to know how to push our buttons and can do things that harm us much more easier than other people who aren't in our relation in that type of relationship with us. But nonetheless, these beings who are quite directly unkind, who are outside of our normal sphere of friends and what have you, are real challenges for us. This was a bit of what I was going to talk about on the one Thursday 2 weeks ago when I unfortunately couldn't do the teaching on bridging our differences. We have a lot of people who we consider to be enemies in the world right now, and we see them as on the other side of the fence, and we've created a lot of divisiveness on the basis of seeing them in that light and holding that view of them. But they are actually one of the richest sources of us being able to transform our minds if we really work with them. Yeah. If we open our hearts, the three things I was going to emphasize from that are having some curiosity about these beings, not to kind of put a label on them and think we've identified what they're all about. And there's no mystery left to them at all because we've read them and we know exactly what they're all about. The second one is to have some compassion, to understand that these beings are under the control of their own crazy states of mind. And that's why they're doing the things that they do, just like we're under the control of our crazy states of mind and why we do often the things that we do in the world, right? Because that's the nature of things. This is what's happening with this being who's in front of us, who's manifesting as a difficult person, an enemy, and we need to have some compassion for them, to see them as a suffering being just like us. And then the third one is to have some courage, to be able to try to meet them, to try to put our bring them into our heart at least. If we can't go and sit down with them and maybe ask what's going on in their lives and try to understand more about them, then at least have the courage to bring them into our hearts in our meditation. To say, okay, what is it like to sit with whoever that person is, that person who exemplifies for you a being that is involved in harming you or holding views that you're opposed to or doing things in the world that greatly upset you. You know, hold that being at least in your heart so that you can begin to generate some awareness of how they're a useful being in regard to your spiritual practice to help you to grow, to develop, to enhance your own practice. So this is the ideal way to see these beings, is to recognize that they have an incredible gift to give us. We just have to be open to receiving it. Again, I wouldn't, in conventional language, we wouldn't call this kindness at all. But in Buddhist terms, this is an incredible act of kindness. Okay, so then item C, think about those who have in the past and currently made, or have in the past made or currently make your life or the lives of those you love difficult, and try to see how you could utilize what has happened as a way to develop your positive qualities. Again, to get you to help push the envelope a little bit to see how can I be more tolerant and patient of this being who is manifesting in this way, who is being unkind to those that I love, and so on. And then point D, try to cultivate a sense of appreciation for this form of kindness that you can experience from all these difficult people who are the perfect opportunity for deepening your qualities. That's the thing. We have to see that these beings are actually the perfect beings to help us to grow and develop. If we don't utilize that opportunity, it's again a missed chance at being able to really deepen our practice. Now, again, we have to all practice where we are, and we have to also be mindful of having perhaps a respectful distance sometimes from those beings who are in that category for us. Because if we don't have the strength of practice to be with them with a mind of patience and tolerance and loving kindness and so on, then we might find ourselves doing things and saying things that only lead to more aggravation and possibly making the situation worse. So once more, this is why we're doing mainly the work on the cushion, mainly the work on our minds, and then hopefully over time it can manifest in being bridge builders, being out there trying to help to understand what is going on for people who we do disagree with in the world or who we find challenging on the basis of the things that they've done. So again, this is the way that we ideally want to look at the challenging people is that they have a kindness that we can receive if we are willing to do that. It's not going to be seen as kindness in the way that it's manifesting because it's seen as them being unkind to us, insensitive to us, whatever. But nonetheless, can we see it in the light of something that will actually enrich our practice? So if we look at all three groups, then we have a way, and all beings fall into one of the three, right? Any being you think about is either a friend, a stranger, or an enemy. They are all showing you some measure of kindness. The first group, very directly, intentionally, they're the ones that, applaud us and are there supporting us. The second group, quite unintentionally and indirectly, but nonetheless, most beings we can assume are involved in our welfare to some degree. I mean, even when it comes to that idea of like knowing beings, remember there was that 6 degrees of separation, they said, based on the number of beings in the world, that we're only like 6 degrees away from any other being in this entire world, right? So we're all really pretty close when it comes down to it. There are beings contributing, maybe not to what we have on our plate, but they contribute to the beings who help, get what we have on our plate. So it's all a web of interconnection when it comes to that second group, all the strangers who we aren't aware of, but are playing a major role in helping us to have what we need. And then the third group, those who once more are actually unkind in conventional terms, but we can see as a kindness if we choose to do so. All right. So this is again a meditation that will help you if you need to reinforce or seeing some obstacles, some blockages to feeling loving kindness towards anyone in those groups. You can think about the fact that they are all showing you incredible kindness. It's just a matter of opening your eyes to seeing that. So again, coming back to page 2, where we're going to revisit then the meditation on developing loving kindness for others. We do this in regard to friends, strangers, and enemies, as it says there, and try to bring to mind the ways that they have been kind. That eventually feeds into cultivating love for all sentient beings. And this is where we get to the immeasurable thought. The immeasurable thought isn't just towards one being, immeasurable is towards all beings without exception, based once more on immeasurable equanimity. As it says here, you can eventually extend loving kindness to all sentient beings by first recalling their kindness in the following ways. So we can think about certainly what we already reflected on in that first addendum is, to go to that and reflect on the various ways that beings are kind. But also you can feed these into it. When it comes to all sentient beings, first of all of our temporal happiness, our wealth, even gaining a favorable rebirth, like having this human rebirth that we currently possess. All of these good things that we are useful for some measure of happiness and can help us to practice our spiritual path, they all come from the merit or good karma that we generate, which is generally done in dependence upon helping and not harming others. So again, I don't need to reiterate this with most of you. I'm sure I've gone over the teachings on morality, what the 10 non-virtues that we want to avoid, the 10 virtue sections we want to engage in. The fundamental premise for in Buddhism for engaging in morality is ahimsa, non-harmfulness. It's to not harm other beings and instead to engage in acts that will help them. You know, refrain from killing them and protect their lives, refrain from stealing from them and protect their possessions, even be generous with your possessions to them. All of these actions of kind of kindness towards others, helping others, create a positive potential that we experience in turn through karma. We plant the karmic seeds to have these things in our lives by giving others those things. If we protect the lives of others, then we end up with long lives, freedom from sickness, and so on. If we protect the possessions of others and give our possessions away gladly, then we will have resources that are safe and assured and that we can rely upon in this life and in future lives. That's the mechanism by which we have everything that brings us some measure of happiness, is tending to the welfare of others. Well, guess what, folks? You need others to do that. Every being, every sentient being is an object of that potentially in our minds through our meditations, but also again in our overt actions. The actions that we engage in of protecting others' lives, protecting their possessions, and so on, that I was mentioning. Won't go into all 10 of them, the non virtues and the virtuous actions that oppose them. Number two, all our temporal needs are provided at least in part by others. For example, again, this is what we saw earlier when we looked at the strangers, but we can enlarge this to say all beings are involved in again, a sort of Indra's net of interconnectivity with us, helping us to have the food that we have by growing it, by processing it, packaging it, distributing it, selling it, even preparing it at times. We depend upon others to have just that basic sustenance in our lives. So that's another way that we can see that we are caught up in a web of interconnectivity with these beings. Not only are they involved in us creating good karma that we benefit from, but they also even create the very things that we have in our lives that bring us some measure of happiness and benefit. Number three, all our ultimate attainments are dependent upon all sentient beings, because without them, we could never become enlightened. Lama Zopa Rinpoche would often, use this line when he was teaching. He'd say, each and every single sentient being in the world, any being you meet, is the source of all your past, present, and future happiness, all the way to enlightenment. And if we look at that and really analyze, we see that every being, of course, when we get to this developing the mind of bodhicitta, it depends upon, once more, every being as a basis of that. You cannot generate bodhicitta if you're excluding some beings from that wish. You know, it's just impossible. You have to have the mind that wants to benefit every one of them without exception. So your ultimate attainment of enlightenment is dependent upon all those beings as a basis for your mind of bodhicitta. So not only are they a basis for our practice of morality and to help us to have what we need in our lives, they are a basis for the ultimate welfare that you can attain. If you want to attain the fulfillment of your potential and become fully enlightened, which is essentially how you fulfill your welfare is by developing your mind to that degree, well, then you have to be dedicated to benefiting others and you have to use them as a basis for that mind of bodhicitta. And then, of course, in Buddhahood, you will also have that other side of your experience where you manifest for them and help them. But it's all based upon the foundation of every one of those beings as a support for your mind of bodhicitta. So, as Rinpoche says, you need every one of those beings. They're all the source of your ultimate welfare, your temporal welfare, all the way up to your ultimate welfare in the state of Buddhahood. If you don't, you know, include those beings, there's no way you can attain that state. So this is a very powerful way to think as well. So when we're kind of cultivating that larger, immeasurable love that is about all beings in a very general way, we can remind ourselves of these three ways that we depend upon others for our own welfare. In other words, the ways that beings are kind to us. They're all our kind mother sentient beings. We use this phrase because we want to see them ideally as having been someone very, very dear to us, who was very instrumental in helping us, especially when we were quite vulnerable in our lives. So again, this is some things that we can feed into this. And then, as it says, the final arrow there, then cultivate a measurable love to all sentient beings with the prayer that we recited earlier. And as I said, there'd be no problem if you wanted to substitute this and say how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had the bliss of Buddhahood. May they have Buddhahood. I myself will cause them to attain Buddhahood. Please, Guru Deity, grant me blessings to be able to do so, because that's the ultimate state of happiness and well being that we can attain from others and that we want them to attain. So that's the idea behind cultivating immeasurable love, is that we want to feed into it this recognition of the kindness of others so that we feel a sense of wanting to reciprocate in a way, wanting to take our role in that relationship really seriously. If beings have benefited us in so many ways, well, then we really do want to benefit them. And once more, those four lines of the immeasurables are the initial one of where it's kind of an aspiration, how wonderful it would be if all beings had that. Secondly, may they have that, where it's more of a wish or a prayer, like may that come to pass. And then the extraordinary thought that makes it a Mahayana practice. I myself will cause them to have that. I'm not going to just sit on the sidelines and wait for somebody else to come along, some Buddha or some other being, to do it. I will take responsibility. And then fourth, granting blessings to be able to accomplish that. So those were the main points I wanted to cover. I might mention that when I taught for Tupten Norberling in Santa Fe on this four measurables earlier this year, it happened to be I was covering immeasurable love the week that there was the comment made by our current vice president about this Latin phrase that comes from Saint Augustine. Maybe you remember this, ordo amoris. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the Latin right. I never took Latin. Anyway, ordo means there's an order, amoris, to love. And of course, you might recall that the vice president was saying, there's an order to my love. In other words, I love those beings who I'm quite close to in a more immediate way. And then if I'm capable, I can extend maybe a little bit beyond that, and then a little bit beyond that, and a little bit beyond. I mean, kind of like the idea is that you reserve your love for those beings who are in that more immediate circle. And perhaps can't extend the love to immigrants and people who you are opposed to or whatever. And when I was thinking about this and wanting to present, something at the teaching, I was thinking about three things that this kind of flies in the face of. First of all, it's only based on attachment, right? Which, of course, we saw already is problematic when we talked last week about the mind of equanimity. It's saying, I'm going to have my love for those beings that I'm attached to, that I'm really quite close to, because they are in my life in a much more direct way, taking care of me. So there's a flavor of attachment to it that's really kind of, I don't know, it's very limited, right? It doesn't help people in any way, because if we're all just attached to our own little tribe, our own little circle, well, that's never going to get us anywhere in this world. But of course, another thing that it is blind to, which of course I would expect when you talk about things outside of traditions where they have a conviction and rebirth, it's blind to other lives, right? As we saw last week with the mind of equanimity, we have to take into consideration the fact that all beings are rotating in these various roles. Well, then if we say, ordo amoris, there's a order to my love, and I'm only going to give it to those beings in the front rows. Well, then does that mean that only those beings qualify when every being has been in my front row one time or another? They've all been very close to me. That was what we looked at last week as one of the reasonings that we can use to develop equanimity, is to understand that there is, this kind of basis for being able to not hold those distorted views, because every being is rotating through these various roles of friend, enemy, stranger. The third thing that is problematic is that it doesn't take into consideration interdependence, which of course is what we talked about tonight, right? That you may think you can only extend your love to those beings who you're quite close to and care about you, but you depend upon so many other beings. As we went through tonight, the kindness that we receive from others is immense. And in that way, you're once more being blind to the interconnection of things in the world. Jana wrote in the chat box, that Pope Leo, it was well, Pope Francis called him out on it first, right? Maybe Pope Leo called him out as well recently, but Pope Francis actually was in at that time was actually making comments publicly that this is not what is meant by this phrase even. And if you go back to what Saint Augustine wrote, he says it was mainly about charity. That oftentimes we find that we cannot give beyond a particular circle, and so it was some advice about maybe if there's only so much resources that you have, how those resources might be doled out. And that was where the phrase really came from. But when it comes to generating love, we should want a heart that's as big as the world. We should want to embrace every being. We shouldn't have these kinds of ideas of, oh, these beings are not as worthy of my love as the beings in the front row. That's, again, very much flies in the face of what we are discussing here in regard to immeasurable love. So again, our vice president has been called out. I'm not making this into a political thing. I just thought it was interesting that he brought up this topic of love and how love manifests in our culture, in our world, in society. And Buddhism is very different than whatever he was expressing. And I think even Christianity is very different from what he was expressing, from what both of the popes have said. So it doesn't seem like he's speaking truly to what is intended by those sorts of comments that are in St. Augustine's writings. But in Buddhism, we're very much about enlarging our hearts to include all beings. You may not be able to actually help all beings. And that may be where once more St. Augustine's advice might be a little bit applicable, because you can't possibly, I mean, I think about eight, if we just talk about human beings in this world, there's close to 8 billion human beings, right? What can I do for 8 billion human beings that I have the potential to do in this life that will benefit every one of them? I can't even give every one of them a penny, right? Because that would still be way more money than what I have, right? You know, I can't do that much for beings in terms of my ability to benefit them quite directly and bring them some measure of happiness in this life. But I can still generate loving kindness for every one of them. I can still have a heart that is open with love and a genuine concern for their well being to any being that I meet. So, again, that's the Buddhist take on it, as far as I can tell. I think, I didn't hear His Holiness give a reprimand to the vice president, but I think he would say something along those lines, like we are meant to open our hearts to all beings, that this is really something we can do and it will enhance our own well being as well as the world around us. So, anyway, I just thought I'd throw that little comment in there since it was in my little notes here when I taught this back in January, I think it was, and I thought, bring it up here as well. Any comments or questions people have on what we covered on immeasurable love tonight? Anyone? You're all filled with loving kindness, I can tell. uh,
Ooh, well,
it
I think you covered it, Don. I think
okay, Bill. Good, thank you.
we just got to do it now.
Yeah, that's always the challenge, right? Come to the teachings and hear the words and then to put it all into practice. But again, the teachings, they emphasize very much kind of working bit by bit. And you can do these meditations. I mean, I talk about their friends, enemies, strangers, but you can do it one at a time. Choose one friend. Choose the one friend that you feel closest to, that your thoughts of loving kindness just naturally arise. That's how you want to feel around every being. And that's the measure, is the degree to which you can have your heart open to that closest being. You want every being to feel that they are equally close. And they aren't in this life, they aren't playing those roles. They might be even, again, difficult, challenging people for us. But we can still hold the view from our hearts that they are that close to us. Again, by seeing their kindness in those variety of ways. Anyone else? Anything to add or to ask about? So once more, you do have that wonderful sheet that you can work on. So you have something to refer to from the class. At the beginning of next week, I will go through a short meditation on immeasurable love to feed that into our motivation, as we did with equanimity tonight, just as a way of reviewing. But I hope you do have a chance to meditate on this somewhat during the week and maybe even try what Richard Gere suggested of just what is it like to change your thought to every being that you see, whether it's a ladybug on your roses or somebody on the homeless on the street or somebody who's just simply walking around SIDS or wherever, that you just happen to notice out of the corner of your eye. What if your first thought is, may you be happy, may you have happiness? Just see how that changes yourself. It might not change the other people around you yet, but nonetheless, it really does get rid of so much of what we tend to do because we're a very judging culture. We're very much about like assessing people, you know, taking a look at them and figuring out very quickly who they are and what they're about and whether we like them or not and whatever. I mean, get rid of those thoughts, try to set those aside and just be there with an open heart. Be there with some thoughts of loving kindness towards any being you meet. That's a really powerful meditation and a way to take it off the cushion as well. So let's go ahead and do our dedications. We don't have, again, the prayer list from the center, but we can think about the beings who are on that prayer list, those who are experiencing illness, those who have obstacles, those who are dying or who have died recently. And we all have beings in our own experience, our own lives that are in those categories. Again, why do we start there? Because those do cause us to have some concern. They do kind of enlarge our hearts a bit, even in this moment, to dedicate for their well being. So we think about those beings who are in our own sort of mental list right now, as well as on the physical list at the center. And we dedicate for their well being to be free from the suffering they're experiencing and to find the happiness and peace that they seek. And in a more general way, we want all beings everywhere to attain these same states of complete freedom from suffering and complete happiness and well being through what we've done here together tonight. Then, Jana, if you wouldn't mind, I will put the prayers on the screen. Let me get that up there, and you can lead.
Dedication prayers. Gewadi Duda Lama Sange Drup Gyurne Drowa Chikyang Malupa Dei Sala Go Parsho Jongtube Semcho Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurchik Ke Wanyam Pa Me Payang Gong Ne Gong Du Pelwar Shok. Long life prayers for our teachers, starting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And recognizing the return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers. And thank you all for being here tonight. I hope that the yard sale on Saturday goes very well. Thank you all for your efforts in helping City Garba to have the funds that you all need to continue doing what you're doing. And I'll look forward to seeing you all in person next Thursday, I'll be back at Hunan Restaurant at 4:30 on Thursday. If anyone wants to join, they're more than welcome to come have dinner and then head to the Gompa for teaching. So everyone be well. I've only got 2 more teachings with all of you before Geshe Sherab returns, but I'm looking forward to these last 2 chances to be with you next couple weeks. So be well, everyone. See you.
Thank you,
Well,
John. Thank you,
Okay.
John.
All
Thank
right.
you,
You're very
John.
welcome. Thank you all so much. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.